On the Common Link Theory by Fahad Alhomoudi, Mcgill, 2006. Four main reasons why Schacht failed to develop an acceptable theory. Reason number 2. Misapprehending Mustalah al-Hadith, Hadith terminology. The crux of my thesis lies in the overarching theoretical claim that Schacht's misunderstanding of the very term tafarrud and his formulation of what a CL is failed to distinguish between the types of tafarrud as articulated by the muhaddiths. Thus, Schacht construes only one type of tafarrud as applying to all non-mutawatir hadith. As such, his claim results in the faulty conclusion that all of the hadiths in Kutub al-Sittah, in fact all non-mutawatir hadith, are inauthentic, having been transmitted via a CL, who is presumed to be the fabricator. What Schacht fails to account for is the multiple common links via multiple isnads for the same hadith, which may reach back to a higher authority. Eventually, this higher authority may be expressed as a companion or the Prophet himself. The significance of this is that virtually all the hadith in Kutub al-Sittah could be examples of tafarrud in Schacht's understanding, despite their having multiple common links through various isnads. Generally speaking, the traditionist term fard mutlaq actually corresponds with Schacht's definition of the common link, and was infrequently practiced amongst muhaddiths. Regarding fard mutlaq, al-Dhahabi points out that this was so rarely found amongst famous transmitters that an imam who narrates 200,000 hadiths might have only 2 or 3 isnads of this type. A major reason behind this conflict in Schacht's understanding is due to the fact that he relied exclusively on irrelevant primary sources and Western sources. He never ever referred to books of Mustalah al-Hadith or Rijal works, biographical literature. Rather, he would discuss the Hadith terms and issues from a fiqh perspective, as demonstrated by the fact that Schacht's main source of information of Hadith was Shafi'i's books, especially his Risala, which deals with selected issues of legal theory, and Al which deals with substantive furu' al-fiqh. These are separate fields and subfields within Islamic sciences that define and apply similar terms differently. Even when Schachtians refer to a particular hadith work in general to support a general phenomenon, they often choose their case studies from books by traditionists dedicated exclusively to the study of unsound hadiths. Even Juynboll recognized a few collections of fraud traditions, such as Al-Mawdu'at of Ibn al-Jawzi, and many of the examples he selected were from other books, though he did not identify them as such. In other words, to make their thesis convincing, the Schachtians should have started not from the Mawdu'at, which they did, but rather from collections considered by traditionists to be authentic. A striking example of Schacht's unfamiliarity with terms employed by traditionists to evaluate transmitters is his use of the term tadlis. With respect to al-Shafi'i, Schacht states that he is loath to face the fact of tadlis, which consists in dissembling or eliminating the names of discreditable transmitters from isnads. But he knows that Malik and Ibn Uyayna, 2 of his most highly esteemed authorities, practiced tadlis. Here Schacht betrays his ignorance concerning the nuanced usage of terminology within Mustalah al-Hadith among the muhaddiths. Tadlis does not necessarily discredit a transmitter. Even al-Bukhari practices tadlis. There are considered to be 5 categories of transmitters who practice tadlis. Malik, Ibn Uyayna fall into a category that does not affect their credibility as transmitters. The third reason why Schacht fails to produce an acceptable theory: the distinction between matan and isnad. As a result of his misinterpretation of hadith terminology and this field of inquiry in general, Schacht failed to accurately discern the CL phenomenon among the traditionists. As such, Schacht's CLT inadequately connected the study of matan and isnad together. He did not understand that more than one isnad could reach the same matan, and falsely accused traditionists of having failed to criticize the matans. Hence his statement, "The use of traditions in the ancient schools of law took little account of the standards of criticism which in the time of Shafi'i have been developed by specialists on traditions." It is Shafi'i's rule that only well-authenticated traditions are to be accepted. That is to say, the criterion of their reliability or the lack of it is the isnad. Additionally, Schacht believed that the traditionists' whole technical criticism of isnad is irrelevant to the purpose of historical analysis. It deserves emphasizing here that the muhaddiths differentiated between the gharib in isnad and in matan. While the latter is limited to the fard mutlaq, the former refers to partial tafarrud. This distinction may fill a a gap in an area of Islamic studies which has not been developed properly in Western academia, as Motsky avers. The conception of the CL has not been sufficiently studied. He states, the conception of the common link as systematic does not explain common links which belong to the generation of the Sahaba, or the case of the Prophet himself being the common link. These cases require other explanations. The common link theory would be less problematic if Schacht applied this distinction, but it seems he did not seem to have received enough attention from Schacht. The ambiguity of Muhaddith's distinction lies perhaps in the different wordings for the same hadith. Iftikhar Zaman discusses the method of evaluating transmitters when they narrate different versions of the same hadith and how they determine the most reliable one. Andreas Gork, addressing the different wording of the same hadith, states, another problem that Schacht faced when dealing with a single hadith is the fact that the same tradition might be quoted in different chapters of the work. The wording of the matan might be slightly different, stressing different points according to the subject it deals with in the hadith collection. This would give the impression that a wrong impression that a tradition was frequently transmitted with a certain isnad, while in fact it is only one single tradition. This distinction was already pointed out by early traditionists, and there are several works focused on the issue of criticizing matan. Ibn Salah, for instance, states, Muhaddis may claim a hadith to have an authentic isnad, yet it will not be accepted because it is shadh or has an illa. This is further explained by Ibn Kathir, who stating that the isnad is sahih or hasan does not mean that the matan is also sahih or hasan, as the matan might be shadh or has an illa. Moreover, Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyah said, it is known that the authenticity of the isnad is a condition of the authenticity of the hadith. However, it does not mean that the hadith is authentic, as there are other conditions for the hadith to be authentic, such as the absence of illa and it not being shadh. Similarly, Al-Iraqi said, based on Muhaddith's opinions, the authenticity of the isnad does not mean the authenticity of the matan. In addition to the theoretical consensus of the Muhaddiths on texts and isnad, there are many practical examples that prove their case. There are many examples of hadiths that are sahih in terms of the isnad, but inauthentic in regard to the matan, one of which is that of Khatib al-Baghdadi, who after mentioning a hadith in his Tarikh about the Caliph Abu Bakr states, even though all of the transmitters of this hadith are reliable, it is not authentic. Another instance is the description that al-Dhahabi gave to one hadith. Its isnad is perfect, yet it is very munkar. A thorough study of the traditionist's critique of matan is provided by al-Tubayshi, who categorized 10 different types of hadith terminology. Alternately, Ibn al-Qayyim listed them based upon their subjects in a more general study. What is relevant to our purpose at hand are the types of tafarrud, such as shadh, munkar, muttarib, and Schacht's claim regard to the isnad being weak, and the traditionist position towards the isnads. His claim concerning their irreverence towards matan is not sustainable. Stay tuned for many more parts.